The galaxy believed it had witnessed war before. It hadn't. Across 10,000 star systems, civilizations proudly displayed the scars of ancient conflicts as symbols of survival. They spoke of legendary sieges that lasted generations, fleets that eclipsed entire suns, and empires that rose and fell beneath oceans of fire. Museums preserved shattered warships. Historians filled endless archives with tales of heroic last stands. To them, war was a familiar chapter, violent, tragic, but ultimately predictable. Every conflict had rules. Every enemy had limits. Every battle ended with treaties, surrender, or exhaustion. That belief had endured for centuries. It was repeated in military academies, debated in council chambers, and whispered by diplomats who believed the age of true annihilation had long since passed. They were wrong. Terribly wrong. Far beyond the crowded trade lanes and glittering capitals of the Galactic Council lay a distant frontier known only as the Outer Reach. There, beneath the pale light of twin blue stars, rested a modest human colony called New Dawn. It was hardly remarkable by galactic standards. No towering megacities pierced the heavens. No colossal shipyards dominated the horizon. Instead, rolling green valleys stretched beneath transparent atmospheric domes, while quiet settlements sparkled beside crystal rivers that reflected the stars like liquid mirrors. Children chased one another through fields of engineered grass. Farmers tended glowing crops designed to thrive beneath alien skies. Cargo shuttles drifted lazily overhead, their engines humming like distant thunder softened by the wind. It was the kind of place that existed not for conquest or wealth, but for hope. A place where families believed tomorrow would always arrive. Then the sky changed. Without warning, the stars above New Dawn began to disappear. One by one, familiar constellations vanished behind enormous shadows descending from orbit. At first, people paused only to stare upward in confusion. Some thought it was an unusual eclipse. Others assumed a convoy had arrived ahead of schedule. But as the darkness spread across the heavens, silence replaced curiosity. Birds fled the forests. Automated weather stations reported impossible gravitational fluctuations. Emergency satellites abruptly lost contact with orbital relays. Across the colony, alarms that had never been tested outside simulation suddenly screamed to life. The first enemy warship emerged through the clouds like a mountain falling from space. Its black armored hull stretched for kilometers, swallowing the sunlight as crimson weapon arrays ignited beneath its surface. Then another appeared. And another. Soon hundreds of colossal vessels filled the sky, arranged with terrifying precision. Their formation was flawless, disciplined, almost ceremonial, as though they had rehearsed this moment long before humanity ever noticed them. Every screen inside New Dawn's command center flashed the same impossible warning. Unknown hostile fleet detected. No diplomatic channel opened. No declaration was transmitted. No demands were made. There was only silence. A silence so complete it felt unnatural. Then came the first beam. A pillar of white fire tore through the atmosphere, striking the colony's northern district with enough force to erase an entire city block in a single heartbeat. The ground convulsed. Glass exploded outward in glittering waves. Towers folded into themselves as if crushed by invisible hands. Shockwaves rolled across the valleys, flattening forests and throwing vehicles into the air like toys. Within seconds, peaceful streets transformed into burning rivers of twisted steel and ash. Far above the destruction, the enemy fleet maintained perfect formation. No celebration. No hesitation. Only methodical extermination. The galaxy would later call it the attack that changed history. But history wasn't changing yet. At that moment, on a forgotten colony at the edge of known space, terrified families ran beneath collapsing skies, emergency sirens wailed through smoke-filled streets, and somewhere deep beneath the flames, a single distress beacon clawed its way into the endless darkness between the stars. It carried only one desperate message. Earth, they're here. For more than 2 centuries, humanity had earned a reputation unlike any other civilization among the stars. They were not feared for conquest, nor worshipped for overwhelming military strength. Instead, they became known as the Builders, the species that arrived after catastrophe, helping shattered worlds stand again. Where ancient wars had scarred planets beyond recognition, human engineers raised gleaming cities from the ruins. Where famine threatened entire civilizations, human terraforming teams transformed barren landscapes into fertile ecosystems. Their fleets escorted merchant convoys through dangerous sectors without demanding tribute, and their diplomats settled conflicts that had raged for generations with patience instead of intimidation. To countless alien races, humans represented something rare in a violent galaxy: stability. Many admired them. Others quietly underestimated them. They mistook compassion for weakness, diplomacy for fear, and restraint for inability. Captain Elena Hayes had spent her entire career proving that exploration could achieve what battles never could. Standing on the command platform of the exploration cruiser Resolute, she watched the endless ocean of stars drift across the panoramic bridge windows. The vessel glided silently through the uncharted Perseus Reach, a region where ancient nebulae glowed like rivers of blue fire and abandoned alien megastructures floated in eternal darkness, their creators long forgotten. Every sensor sweep uncovered mysteries older than recorded history. Massive crystalline asteroids shimmered beneath distant suns, while ghostly electromagnetic storms danced across empty space like invisible spirits. For Elena, this was why humanity had reached the stars, not to dominate them, but to understand them. The bridge moved with calm precision. Officers quietly monitored navigation data while holographic star charts rotated above the central console, projecting countless unexplored systems waiting to be mapped. Artificial intelligence assistants analyzed atmospheric readings from nearby planets, searching for signs of life hidden beneath clouds of frozen methane and oceans of liquid ammonia. The atmosphere aboard Resolute was almost peaceful. Even after years in deep space, the crew still found wonder in every new horizon. Then the silence broke. A sharp warning tone echoed across the bridge. It wasn't loud, but every officer froze instantly. The signal didn't arrive through standard military channels. It bypassed encrypted communication networks, ignored exploration frequencies, and forced itself directly into the ship's emergency receivers using an authentication code that hadn't been activated in nearly 70 years. Every display on the bridge flickered before turning crimson. Priority Omega distress signal. Elena felt a chill settle deep in her chest. Source? She asked, her voice steady despite the growing knot of dread. The communications officer swallowed hard while scanning the data. Human colony New Dawn. For a heartbeat, nobody spoke. New Dawn was nearly 6 weeks away at maximum civilian jump speed. It sat far beyond established defense routes, a peaceful agricultural colony with no strategic value, no military fleet, and no history of conflict. There was no logical reason for an Omega-level emergency. Play it, Elena ordered quietly. Static flooded the bridge. Then came the recording. The camera shook violently as someone ran through smoke-choked streets. Buildings burned in every direction. Entire neighborhoods disappeared beneath pillars of white fire descending from the heavens. Sirens screamed so loudly they distorted the audio. In the distance, children cried while emergency responders dragged survivors toward underground shelters already overflowing with frightened civilians. The sky itself had vanished behind impossible shadows. A terrified voice struggled to breathe between explosions. They came, without warning. The transmission stuttered. The image froze for a fraction of a second before revealing a massive black warship hanging motionless above the colony like a god of destruction. Then another explosion. The camera fell sideways. Dust filled the screen. A small child reached toward the recording device before disappearing behind collapsing concrete. One final voice whispered through overwhelming static. Tell Earth. The transmission cut to silence. No explosion. No farewell. Only emptiness. The bridge remained motionless. Nobody breathed. Nobody spoke. Captain Elena Hayes stared into the black screen, her reflection barely visible against the darkness. In that terrible silence, she understood something every experienced commander eventually learns. Some messages are not calls for rescue. They are witnesses. And somewhere beyond the endless stars, new dawn had just become one. The news reached the Galactic Council before the smoke over New Dawn had even begun to settle. Across hundreds of inhabited worlds, emergency broadcasts interrupted commerce, celebrations, and political debates with the same haunting images recovered from the colony's final transmission. Towering holographic displays flickered to life in crowded city plazas. Merchant captains paused their convoys mid-transit. Families gathered around public information terminals, watching in stunned silence as the once peaceful settlement disappeared beneath orbital bombardment. Commentators struggled to find words. Military analysts replayed the footage frame by frame, searching for some tactical explanation that would make the horror seem rational. None could. There had been no warning. No negotiations. No attempt at occupation. It had been extermination, executed with cold precision. Within hours, the Grand Assembly Hall of the Galactic Council overflowed with representatives from nearly every known civilization. The chamber itself was a masterpiece of interstellar architecture, a colossal sphere suspended above an artificial gravity well, where thousands of floating diplomatic platforms formed concentric circles around a glowing central podium. Every species had its own way of expressing fear. Some delegates hissed nervously through layered mandibles. Others changed color across shimmering skin. Mechanical civilizations remained perfectly still, their processors quietly calculating probabilities that grew darker with every passing minute. The debate erupted almost immediately. Some demanded sanctions against the Dominion of Karth, whose fleet signatures matched those recorded over New Dawn. Others pleaded for caution. "We cannot risk another interstellar war," one elder ambassador warned, his voice echoing through the chamber. "Retaliation will only multiply the casualties." Another representative insisted on launching an independent investigation before assigning blame. A third proposed opening diplomatic channels with the Dominion, believing the attack could have been the result of misinformation or rogue commanders. The arguments continued for hours. Procedures. Votes. Committees. Resolutions. Words filled the chamber while millions of kilometers away, rescue ships drifted through the ruins of New Dawn collecting what little remained. Entire districts had been fused into black glass. Escape tunnels had collapsed beneath mountains of debris. Automated drones searched endlessly through radioactive dust, identifying survivors with fading thermal signatures that disappeared one by one. Every recovered artifact, a child's toy, a fractured photograph, a scorched family journal, felt heavier than the wreckage surrounding it. Meanwhile, across human space, nothing. No speeches appeared from Earth's leaders. No furious declarations echoed across military frequencies. No public demands for vengeance filled the news networks. Humanity simply fell silent. At first, many interpreted the silence as grief. Then they noticed the movement. Shipyards orbiting Mars halted all civilian construction without explanation. Deep beneath the ice of Europa, sealed defense installations that had remained dormant for over a century suddenly came online. Massive reactor cores awakened beneath kilometers of frozen ocean, sending ancient power grids humming back to life. Across the moon, enormous blast doors hidden inside forgotten mountain ranges slowly opened for the first time in generations. Dark silhouettes emerged. Warships. Not modern patrol cruisers or peacekeeping vessels. These were monsters from another era. Titan-class dreadnoughts whose armor still bore the scars of humanity's oldest wars. Carrier groups that had officially been decommissioned decades earlier. Experimental battleships erased from every public database. One after another, they powered up without fanfare. No music. No ceremonies. Only the deep vibration of engines awakening after decades of silence. Military commanders received encrypted orders carrying authorization codes that only existed in classified legends. Entire fleets departed their hidden docks within minutes, slipping into hyperspace so quietly that many foreign intelligence agencies didn't realize they had moved until they were already gone. Captain Elena Hayes watched the classified fleet movements appear across her tactical display aboard the Resolute. Every blinking icon represented thousands of lives, and every destination had been redacted. She had served for 27 years. She had never seen these codes before. Her executive officer finally broke the silence. "Captain, should we be worried?" Elena stared at the impossible number of fleets vanishing into the darkness between stars. Her expression never changed. "Not worried," she whispered. She watched the final fleet disappear from the map. Terrified. Because every human officer knew one lesson history had buried deep beneath centuries of peace. When humanity shouted, there was still hope. When humanity argued, there was still time. But when humanity became completely silent, it meant the decision had already been made. The answers came too late. 3 days after the destruction of New Dawn, while humanity's fleets continued their silent advance through hyperspace, the Galactic Council authorized access to sealed human historical archives, records that had remained classified since the end of the Sol Reconstruction era. Most delegates expected to uncover military intelligence or diplomatic correspondence that might explain humanity's grim determination. Instead, they found something far more unsettling. Buried beneath layers of encryption was the true identity of New Dawn, a truth so closely guarded that even most human citizens had never known it existed. At the center of the council chamber, a holographic projection slowly assembled itself from fragments of recovered data. A lonely world appeared, its peaceful forests and quiet settlements fading away until only a massive underground structure remained. It stretched beneath the colony for hundreds of kilometers, protected by quantum shielding, planetary crust, and security systems designed to survive the collapse of civilizations. The structure carried a single designation: the Remembrance Vault. A human historian stepped forward, her voice calm despite the silence that had fallen over the chamber. "When Earth nearly destroyed itself during the final resource wars," she began, "our ancestors made a promise. They swore that humanity would never again allow its history, its culture, or its identity to be erased." The hologram shifted. Delegates watched as endless chambers appeared beneath the mountains of New Dawn. Vast halls lined with crystalline archives stretched farther than the eye could see. DNA libraries preserved the complete genetic record of humanity, from the earliest people who walked Earth's ancient savannas to every generation born among the stars. Countless works of literature, music, art, philosophy, and scientific discovery rested inside quantum memory cores engineered to survive for millions of years. Personal journals. Family photographs. Children's drawings. Languages long forgotten. Every triumph. Every mistake. Every sacrifice. It was not merely a vault. It was humanity's memory. Its soul. The historian looked across the chamber, meeting the eyes of species that suddenly realized the magnitude of what had been lost. "Every colony contributes to our civilization," she continued softly. "But only one world carried the complete inheritance of every human life that came before." A cold silence settled over the council. Someone finally whispered the question no one wanted answered. Did the Dominion know? Another recording appeared. Recovered battlefield intelligence. Intercepted communications. Translated command logs from the Dominion fleet. There was no misunderstanding. No navigational error. No rogue commander acting independently. The attack had been carefully planned after Dominion intelligence identified New Dawn as a symbolic human target. They believed destroying humanity's greatest cultural archive would cripple morale, erase historical continuity, and force Earth into surrender without a prolonged war. Instead, they had awakened something they did not understand. Another sealed document opened. Its title alone caused several delegates to visibly recoil. Human Civilization Continuity Act. Section 9, Response to Deliberate Civilizational Extermination. The Chamber's artificial intelligence began reading the text aloud. In the event that any external power knowingly attempts the permanent eradication of humanity's biological, cultural, or historical continuity, such action shall be recognized as an absolute extinction attempt. The voice paused. Then continued. The preservation of civilization shall require the permanent elimination of the aggressor's capacity to repeat the offense. No one moved. No one interrupted. The final line appeared across every holographic display. Authorized sentence, total annihilation of the aggressor's war-making power. The words hung in the air like a death sentence. Several ambassadors turned instinctively toward the human delegation. They expected anger, hatred, triumph. Instead, the humans looked heartbroken. One elderly delegate slowly closed the archive before speaking for the first time. "We prayed," he said quietly, "that this law would never be needed again." His voice carried centuries of sorrow rather than vengeance. But some lessons are written in blood. Far beyond the council chamber, hidden beneath the darkness between stars, humanity's fleets continued advancing toward Dominion space. Not out of rage. Not for revenge. But because, long ago, humanity had promised itself that no civilization would ever erase its future by destroying its past. And that promise was now coming due. The first warning the Dominion received was not an explosion. It was silence. Entire border outposts simply stopped transmitting. Long-range sensor arrays that had watched the frontier for decades blinked offline one after another, leaving enormous sections of space blind. Patrol fleets disappeared without issuing distress calls. Hyperlane beacons went dark in perfect sequence, as though an invisible hand were extinguishing the lights of an empire. Dominion admirals stared at tactical displays filled with expanding black voids where military installations had existed only minutes earlier. They searched desperately for enemy fleet signatures, but found almost nothing. Humanity was advancing without announcing itself, without broadcasting threats, and without leaving survivors to report its movements. Fear spread through the Dominion faster than any ship could travel. Then the darkness arrived. Across dozens of strategic systems, space itself seemed to tear apart as enormous quantum jump apertures opened directly inside the Dominion's defensive formations. Humanity had ignored every accepted law of hyperspace navigation. Battleships emerged where physics insisted they could not exist, inside fortified orbital rings, behind planetary defense grids, even within the protective envelope of heavily armed fortress moons. Towering Titan-class dreadnoughts glided from the collapsing portals like ancient predators awakened from a 1,000-year sleep. Their hulls were scarred by forgotten wars, yet every weapon system burned with terrifying precision. There were no triumphant broadcasts. No declarations of vengeance. Only a single encrypted signal transmitted across every Dominion frequency. Civilian evacuation corridors are now open. Leave immediately. Confusion swept through the enemy ranks. The Dominion had expected indiscriminate retaliation. Instead, every civilian transport attempting to flee was silently guided through protected hyperspace routes established by the very fleets invading their territory. Medical stations appeared near evacuation zones. Rescue drones pulled frightened families from damaged habitats before the fighting reached them. Humanity had come to destroy an empire's ability to wage war, not its innocent people. The military received no such mercy. Artificial intelligence battle network seized command of Dominion communications within seconds, replacing tactical displays with static before commanders could issue coordinated orders. Orbital defense cannons suddenly turned toward empty space, their targeting systems rewritten by quantum cyber warfare. Swarms of autonomous drones flooded through ventilation shafts and maintenance tunnels, dismantling reactors, shield generators, and missile silos with machine-like precision. Massive weapons platforms that had taken decades to build collapsed into expanding clouds of molten debris without firing a single shot. Captain Elena Hayes stood aboard the bridge of the Resolute, now reassigned as a strategic command vessel within the advancing fleet. Through the forward observation screen, she watched an enemy fortress station slowly break apart against the backdrop of a crimson nebula. There was no satisfaction in her eyes. Only a heavy silence. "Damage assessment?" she asked. Her tactical officer answered quietly. "Military targets neutralized. Civilian casualties remain below projected minimum." Elena nodded once. "Continue." The battle spread across system after system with relentless precision. Dominion admirals attempted desperate counterattacks, but every maneuver had already been anticipated. Human predictive algorithms analyzed billions of possible outcomes every second, guiding fleets through impossible firing solutions that seemed almost supernatural. Missile salvos curved around planets before striking hidden command bunkers. Stealth frigates emerged from electromagnetic storms to disable fleet carriers before vanishing back into darkness. Every strategy the Dominion deployed had once been studied by humanity, centuries earlier. Within 72 hours, the Dominion ceased to exist as a military power. Its shipyards were silent. Its orbital arsenals drifted in shattered fragments. Its war academies stood empty beneath broken banners. The final surviving flagship, its engines crippled and weapons destroyed, transmitted unconditional surrender across every remaining communication channel. On the bridge of the Resolute, every officer turned toward Captain Hayes. The channel opened. Her face appeared simultaneously on millions of screens across the galaxy. She spoke calmly. No anger. No triumph. No celebration. To every civilization watching. She began, her voice steady enough to carry across the silence of space. Humanity did not come here seeking revenge. Behind her, shattered enemy warships floated like silent monuments beneath distant stars. We came to ensure that no one would ever believe genocide is a strategy that can succeed. She paused for a single heartbeat. If you attack our people. The camera slowly pulled back as thousands of human vessels stood motionless across the conquered frontier. We will end your ability to wage war. And for the first time in recorded galactic history. No one doubted that promise. Years passed, but the galaxy never truly recovered from what had happened. The map still showed the former territory of the Dominion of Karth, yet every navigator who crossed that region described the same unsettling feeling. There were no military patrols, no fortified checkpoints, no booming shipyards echoing with the sounds of war. Only silent stars burned above abandoned worlds where broken orbital stations drifted endlessly through the void. Massive battlecruisers, once symbols of an empire's unstoppable power, floated lifeless in deep space, their hulls scarred and hollow, slowly orbiting forgotten planets like monuments to a lesson written in fire. Travelers often reduced engine power as they passed through the sector, not out of necessity, but out of respect. Even space itself seemed quieter there. Far away, on the restored world of New Dawn, life had begun again. Where molten glass and ash had once covered the valleys, forests now stretched beneath clear skies. Children laughed through fields that had been replanted by generations who refused to let destruction define their future. Rivers flowed once more between white stone bridges, and every home had been rebuilt with materials stronger than those that had fallen before. Humanity had chosen not to erase the scars of the colony completely. Fragments of blackened foundations remained preserved beneath transparent crystal, allowing every visitor to witness exactly where tragedy had begun. Pain, they believed, should never be hidden if it carried a lesson worth remembering. At the center of the rebuilt capital stood the Memorial of Dawn. It rose hundreds of meters into the sky, carved from the fused remains of the original colony's foundations. From a distance, it resembled a beam of frozen light reaching toward the stars. As daylight crossed its polished surface, thousands of engraved names shimmered into view, not soldiers, not politicians, not heroes of war, but ordinary people. Teachers. Farmers. Engineers. Children. Entire families whose dreams had ended in a single morning. There were no statues celebrating victory. No banners displaying conquered enemies. Humanity had never wanted the monument to glorify war. It existed to honor those who never had the chance to finish their story. Every year, representatives from countless alien civilizations traveled across the galaxy to stand before the memorial. Some arrived carrying flowers native to distant worlds. Others brought crystals, woven fabrics, or songs from cultures humanity had once helped save. They stood together in silence beneath the towering monument, listening as the wind passed softly through its hollow interior, creating a low, haunting tone that sounded almost like distant voices. It reminded everyone that peace was never permanent. It survived only because someone was willing to protect it. High above the monument, visible even from orbit, a single inscription had been etched into the white stone in letters large enough to be read by approaching spacecraft. Mercy built our civilization. Memory gave it purpose. But if you force humanity to choose between peace and survival, there will be no second warning. The word spread across the galaxy faster than any official treaty ever could. Military academies rewrote their doctrine. Diplomats quoted the inscription before every major negotiation. Empires that once believed fear alone could maintain order quietly abandoned expansionist ambitions. Not because humanity ruled the galaxy, but because every civilization now understood the difference between a species that loved peace, and a species fully capable of ending a war forever. Captain Elena Hayes returned to New Dawn many years after the conflict had ended. Her hair had turned silver, and the medals on her uniform carried little meaning compared to the memories she still carried. She walked alone through the memorial grounds until she reached the place where the colony's first distress beacon had been recovered. The damaged transmitter rested beneath crystal glass, forever frozen in the moment it had sent humanity its final plea. She closed her eyes. For a brief moment, she could almost hear that trembling voice again. "Tell Earth." She smiled sadly. "We did," she whispered. Above her, children chased one another beneath peaceful skies that no longer feared the shadows of war. And somewhere beyond the countless stars, every civilization remembered the same truth. Humanity would always offer peace first. But if peace was answered with extermination, the stars themselves would remember who made that choice.